The small human ship fell through the purple sky of Varanthos Prime like a wounded bird, trailing smoke and fire behind it as it crashed through the strange black trees of the obsidian forest below. Commander Marcus Cole gripped the controls with white knuckles and pulled hard, trying to slow the descent. But his engines were dead, and his shields were gone, and there was nothing left to do but brace for impact. The ship hit the ground with a terrible sound of tearing metal and breaking glass, and Marcus felt his body slam against the restraints as everything went dark around him. When he opened his eyes again, he was lying in the wreckage of his cockpit, and through the cracked window he could see a sky filled with 3 moons and stars he did not recognize. He was alive, but he knew immediately that he was in terrible trouble. Marcus had been on a simple survey mission near the edge of human space when a freak gravitational wave had pulled his ship off course and thrown him through what must have been some kind of natural wormhole. Now he was somewhere no human had ever been before, crashed on a world that his damaged computer could only identify as belonging to a species called the HFY. He had heard stories about them back on Earth, whispered tales from the few diplomats who had tried and failed to establish contact with their ancient empire. The HFY were old, older than humanity could truly understand, and they wanted nothing to do with the young noisy species that had recently burst onto the galactic stage. They considered humans to be primitive creatures, barely worth noticing, certainly not worth speaking to. And now Marcus had crashed on one of their most sacred moons, a place called Varanthos Prime that was forbidden to all outsiders. He pulled himself from the wreckage and stood on shaking legs, looking around at the forest of black glass trees that surrounded him. The air was cold and thin, but breathable, and the gravity was a little stronger than Earth, but not enough to slow him down. He needed to find shelter and water and some way to send a distress signal back to human space. But before he could take more than a few steps, he heard the sound of ships overhead. And when he looked up, he saw 3 sleek silver vessels descending through the purple sky toward his crash site. The HFY had found him. Marcus thought about running, but there was nowhere to go, and his legs were still weak from the crash. So he simply stood and waited as the ships landed and their doors opened. The beings that emerged were like nothing he had ever seen before. They were tall, at least 8 feet in height, and their bodies seemed to be made of living crystal that caught the light and scattered it into rainbows. Their faces were angular and sharp, with eyes that glowed a pale blue, and they moved with a grace that made Marcus feel clumsy and small. There were 6 of them, and they surrounded him in a perfect circle, their crystal hands holding weapons that hummed with energy. One of them stepped forward and spoke in a voice like wind chimes, a language Marcus could not understand but which his damaged translator attempted to process. "You are human," the translator finally managed to say. "You have committed great sacrilege by setting foot on sacred ground, and for this crime you will face the judgment of the Citadel." Marcus raised his hand slowly, showing that he meant no harm, and tried to explain that his crash had been an accident, that he had not meant to trespass on their world. But the HFY did not seem to care about his explanations. They bound his hands with restraints made of solid light and marched him to one of their ships. And as the vessel rose into the sky, Marcus looked down at the wreckage of his own ship and wondered if he would ever see Earth again. The Citadel of Echoes was a massive structure built into the side of a mountain, a fortress of black stone and silver metal that seemed to stretch up forever into the sky. The HFY took Marcus deep inside, down countless stairs and through countless corridors, until they reached the lowest level of the prison here, in the darkness beneath the mountain. They threw him into a cell carved from solid rock and sealed the door with a barrier of crackling energy. "You will remain here until the council decides your fate," one of the guards said. "This may take many cycles, as the affairs of vermin are of little concern to the Empire. and then they left him alone in the darkness for the first few days. Marcus did nothing but sit and think and try not to despair. He was a soldier, trained to survive in difficult situations. But this was beyond anything he had ever faced before. He was alone on an alien world, imprisoned by beings who saw him as less than an insect, with no way to contact home and no hope of rescue. But Marcus was also human, and humans had a long history of refusing to give up, even when all hope seemed lost. So he began to watch and listen and learn. He noticed that one of the guards who brought his food was different from the others. Quieter and less cruel, with crystal skin, was darker than the rest. This guard would sometimes linger at the cell door, watching Marcus with what seemed like curiosity. One day, Marcus decided to speak to him. "What is your name?" Marcus asked. The guard was silent for a long moment, and Marcus thought he would simply leave without answering. But then he spoke in a voice that was softer than the others. "I am called Sereth," he said, "and you should not speak to me, human, for I am disgraced, and my company will bring you no favor." But Marcus did not care about favor, and over the following weeks he continued to talk to Sereth whenever the guard came to his cell. Slowly, carefully, a strange friendship began to form between them. Sereth told Marcus about the HFY Empire, about their long history and their rigid laws and their belief that they were the greatest civilization in the galaxy. But he also told Marcus something else, something that the other HFY refused to speak about. The Empire was dying. A cosmic plague called the Hollow Rot was consuming their home star, eating it from the inside out. And within 10 years, both Varanthos Prime and the HFY homeworld would freeze and die. "There is a cure," Sereth whispered one night, his crystal eyes glowing dimly in the darkness. "A device created by the ancients and hidden in the forbidden royal chamber at the heart of the citadel. But no one has entered that place for 8,000 years. Why not?" Marcus asked. "Because the last emperor declared it sacrilege," Sereth replied. "And our laws do not bend, not even to save our people from extinction." Marcus listened to these words, and something began to stir in his heart. It was a feeling he knew well, a feeling that had driven humans to climb mountains and cross oceans and reach for the stars. It was the refusal to accept that something was impossible simply because someone said it was. And in that dark cell beneath the mountain, Commander Marcus Cole began to form a plan. 3 months had passed since Marcus Cole had been thrown into the lowest prison of the Citadel of Echoes. And in that time he had learned many things. He had learned the language of the HFY, practicing with Sereth until he could speak it without the help of his broken translator. He had learned the rhythms of the prison, the times when guards changed shifts and the patterns of their patrols. He had learned that the HFY were creatures of perfect order, beings who followed rules and schedules with absolute precision, because that was simply how their minds worked. And he had learned that this precision, this inability to imagine anything outside their rigid patterns, was their greatest weakness. No one had ever escaped from the lower tiers of the Citadel, and the HFY boasted about this fact with great pride. Their security was perfect. They said their protocols unbreakable, their prison inescapable. But the HFY had never imprisoned a human before. They did not understand that humans were creatures of chaos, beings who could adapt and improvise and think in ways that no logical mind could predict. They did not understand that a human trapped in a corner was the most dangerous thing in the universe. Marcus began his plan by telling stories. Whenever the guards came to check on him or bring him food, he would speak to them in their own language and tell them tales of Earth. He told them about human music, about the way a simple song could make people laugh or cry or fall in love. He told them about human wars, about the terrible destruction that their species had inflicted upon itself again and again throughout history. He told them about human love, about the way two people could care for each other so deeply that they would sacrifice everything just to be together. The HFY found these stories baffling and strange, but also fascinating in a way they could not explain. They were beings of pure logic, and the idea of a species driven by emotion and chaos was both disturbing and intoxicating to them. Soon, guards who had no business being near his cell would find excuses to walk past, hoping to hear another story from the strange little creature in the darkness below. Marcus used their curiosity against them. He learned their names and their stories, and he found the ones who were unhappy, the ones who felt trapped by the rigid rules of their society, the ones who wondered if there might be more to existence than following orders. He did not try to turn them against their empire, because he knew that would never work, but he planted seeds of doubt in their minds, tiny questions that would grow over time. And while he talked and listened and made friends among his captors, he was also studying the locks on his cell. The HFY used barriers made of energy, controlled by crystalline mechanisms that resonated at specific frequencies every time a guard opened or closed the door. Marcus listened carefully to the sound the lock made, memorizing the pattern of tones until he could hear them in his sleep. He had no tools, no equipment, no technology of any kind. But he had something the HFY could not understand. He had human ingenuity, using scraps of metal from his food containers and threads from his clothing. Marcus built a tiny device that could produce sound waves at very specific frequencies. It took him weeks to get it right, testing it in tiny increments whenever the guards were far away, adjusting and refining until he was sure it would work. Then he waited for the perfect moment. It came on a night when the moons of Varanthos Prime aligned in a pattern that happened only once every few years. A sacred event that drew most of the guards away to participate in ancient rituals. Sereth came to his cell one last time, and in his hands he carried a small data crystal. "This is a map," Sereth said quietly. "It shows the path to the Forbidden's royal chamber, through passages that have been forgotten for thousands of years." Marcus took the crystal and looked at his friend with gratitude, knowing that Sereth was risking everything by helping him. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus asked. "If they catch you, they will execute you." Sereth was quiet for a moment, his crystal eyes flickering with something that might have been emotion. "Because I have watched you for 3 months," he finally said, "and I have learned something from your stories, something my people have forgotten. And that is that sometimes the rules must be broken. Sometimes the impossible must be attempted, because the cost of doing nothing is greater than the cost of failure." He paused and looked toward the dark passages that led deeper into the mountain. "But I must warn you," he continued. "The chamber is not merely locked, and it is guarded by something older than the Empire itself. Something that our ancestors feared so greatly that they chose extinction over facing it again." Marcus smiled, a human expression that Sereth had learned to recognize over their months of friendship. "Then your ancestors never met a human with nothing left to lose," Marcus said. He activated his makeshift device, and the energy barrier flickered and died. And for the first time in 3 months, Marcus Cole stepped out of his cell as a free man. The alarms began screaming within seconds, filling the citadel with sound and light as the HFY realized that the impossible had happened. But Marcus was already running, moving through the darkness with the map crystal in his hand, following passages that had not been walked in thousands of years. Behind him he could hear the sounds of pursuit, guards shouting and weapons charging. But the passages were narrow and twisting, designed for beings much smaller than the tall crystalline HFY. Marcus squeezed through gaps that his pursuers could not follow, climbed through shafts that were too small for their bodies, and used every trick he had learned in his years as a soldier to stay one step ahead. The chase lasted for hours, and there were moments when Marcus was sure he would be caught. Moments when the guards were so close, He could hear the humming of their weapons, but somehow he kept going. Driven by something deeper than fear or survival instinct, he thought about Earth. About the blue skies and green forests and the faces of the people he loved. He thought about Sareth, who had sacrificed everything to give him this chance. He thought about the hollow rot, the cosmic plague that was killing this world and its people, and about the cure that waited somewhere in the darkness ahead. And most of all, he thought about what it meant to be human. Humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy, and they were not the smartest or the oldest or the most advanced, but they had something that no other species seemed to possess: a stubborn refusal to accept defeat, a burning need to prove that the impossible was just another word for not yet accomplished. As the sounds of pursuit faded behind him and the passages grew darker and older around him, Marcus Cole pressed forward into the unknown somewhere ahead. The forbidden royal chamber was waiting, and whatever ancient horror guarded its secrets, Marcus was going to face it, because that was what humans did. They faced the darkness. Not because they were not afraid, but because they refused to let fear stop them from doing what needed to be done. The ancient passages grew darker and colder as Marcus went deeper into the mountain. And soon he was walking through tunnels that no living being had entered for thousands of years. The walls here were different from the rest of the citadel, covered in strange carvings and symbols that seemed to glow faintly with their own inner light. Marcus did not understand the writing, but he could feel the age of this place, the weight of countless centuries pressing down upon him like a physical force. According to the map Sareth had given him, the Forbidden's royal chamber lay at the very heart of the mountain, in a temple that had been built before the HFY had even discovered how to travel between stars. This was the oldest place in their entire empire, sacred and terrible, and Marcus was walking through it like he belonged there. The first trap nearly killed him. A section of floor gave way beneath his feet, and Marcus barely managed to grab the edge of the pit before he fell into the darkness below. He pulled himself up and lay on the cold stone, breathing hard, realizing that the ancient builders had designed this place to kill intruders. From that point on, he moved more carefully, testing each step before he took it, watching for the subtle signs that might indicate another trap. The second trap was a corridor, filled with beams of burning light that crisscrossed the passage in patterns that seemed random but were actually designed to catch anyone who tried to pass through. Marcus watched the beams for a long time, studying their movements, and eventually he realized that they were meant for the tall bodies of the HFY. He was much smaller than them, and by crawling on his belly and timing his movements perfectly, he was able to slip through gaps in the pattern that the builders had never imagined. The third trap was a puzzle, a door sealed by a mechanism that required the solver to arrange a series of crystal blocks in a specific pattern. A HFY would have tried to solve it through pure logic, calculating the mathematical possibilities until they found the correct answer. But Marcus was human, and humans did not always think in straight lines. He looked at the puzzle not as a math problem, but as a picture. And suddenly, he could see that the blocks were meant to form an image. A simple drawing of a star surrounded by smaller lights. He arranged the blocks by instinct rather than calculation. And the door slid open with a sound like distant thunder beyond the door. The passage opened into a vast circular chamber. And there Marcus stopped and stared at what waited for him. The chamber was enormous, stretching up into darkness so far above that he could not see the ceiling. And in its center stood a massive structure that seemed to be made of pure light. It was not a machine, and it was not a creature, but something in between, a consciousness given form, a mind made visible. And as Marcus stepped into the chamber, that consciousness turned its attention toward him. The voice that spoke was not sound, but thought. Words that appeared directly in his mind without passing through his ears. A human, the voice said. And there was something like surprise in its tone. "This is unexpected, for in all the ages since I was placed here, No human has ever walked these halls. Marcus stood his ground, though every instinct in his body was screaming at him to run. "What are you?" he asked. "I am the Guardian," the voice replied. "Created by the precursors to watch over what lies within this chamber, and to test any who seek to claim it." The precursors, Marcus thought, remembering the stories Sereth had told him about the ancient beings who had created the HFY as servants long ago. "I need what is inside this chamber," Marcus said. "There is a plague killing the star of this world, and the cure is here." "I know of the hollow rot," the Guardian replied. "And I know that the HFY have had 8,000 years to come and claim the cure, yet none of them have done so, because their laws forbid it and their fear prevents it." The Guardian's light seemed to pulse as it continued speaking. "Why do you seek what they fear to claim?" It asked. Marcus thought carefully before answering, knowing that this moment might decide everything, because they will die if someone does not help them. He said, "They imprisoned you," the Guardian said. And somehow Marcus could feel it looking into his memories, seeing everything that had happened since he crashed on this world. "They mocked your kind and called you vermin, and they threw you into the darkness to be forgotten." "Yes," Marcus admitted. "They did all of that, and still you would save them?" This was the question that mattered. Marcus realized the test that the Guardian had been waiting to give. He thought about the 3 months he had spent in that dark cell, the loneliness and fear and despair that had threatened to break him. He thought about the cruelty of the guards, who had seen him as nothing more than an animal, the cold indifference of a civilization that considered humanity too primitive to be worth their attention. And he thought about Earth. He thought about his daughter Sarah, and her bright smile and the way she laughed when he tickled her. He thought about the blue oceans and the green forests, and the golden sunsets that he had taken for granted his whole life. He thought about all the times in human history when people had been cruel to each other, when they had hated and fought and destroyed, and about all the times when they had chosen instead to forgive and rebuild, and reach out their hands in friendship. That was what made humanity special. Marcus realized, not their intelligence or their technology or their strength, but their capacity for compassion, even toward those who did not deserve it. "Yes," Marcus said finally, his voice steady and sure, "I will still save them. Because that is what humans do. We save people, even the ones who do not deserve it, especially the ones who do not deserve it. Because maybe saving them is what makes them deserve it." The Guardian was silent for a long moment, its light flickering and shifting as it considered his words. Then something changed in the chamber. A feeling like a great weight being lifted, like a door that had been locked for thousands of years finally swinging open in all my ages of waiting, the Guardian said. "I have tested many who sought to enter the chamber, beings of great power and knowledge and strength, and all of them failed because they sought power for themselves or their people alone." The light grew brighter, warmer, and Marcus felt something like approval radiating from the ancient consciousness. "But you are different. Small human," the Guardian continued. "You seek to save those who have wronged you, to give rather than to take, to heal rather than to conquer. And that is something I have not seen in a very long time." Behind the Guardian, a massive doorway began to appear in the wall, carved from light itself. "The chamber is open to you," the Guardian said. "Enter and claim what you seek, and may you use it wisely." Marcus walked forward on legs that trembled with exhaustion and relief, passing through the doorway of light into the secrets that waited beyond. And as he crossed that threshold, he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The Forbidden's royal chamber was nothing like Marcus had expected. He had imagined a vault filled with ancient weapons or a laboratory full of strange machines. But instead, he found himself standing in a room that looked almost like a library, The walls were lined with shelves that held thousands of glowing crystals, each one pulsing with soft light. And in the center of the room stood a pedestal upon which rested a single device about the size of a human skull. But it was not the device that drew his attention first. It was the images that began playing in the air around him the moment he entered. Projections of light that told a story that had been hidden for 8,000 years. Marcus watched in stunned silence as the history of the HFY unfolded before his eyes. He saw their beginnings as simple creatures, servants created by the precursors to perform tasks that the ancient masters found beneath them. He saw their slow awakening, their growing intelligence, their first stirrings of desire for freedom and independence. And he saw the war. The HFY had rebelled against their creators, rising up against the precursors in a conflict that had raged across dozens of star systems for centuries. The precursors were powerful beyond imagination, beings who could reshape reality with a thought, and the HFY had seemed doomed to defeat. But their scientists had created something terrible, a weapon unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They called it the Hollow Rod. It was not a bomb or a missile or a beam of energy, but something far more insidious, a living plague designed to consume the very stars themselves. The HFY had unleashed it upon the precursor home system, and it had worked beyond their wildest dreams, eating through the heart of their master's sun until the entire system went dark and cold. The precursors were destroyed, their civilization wiped from existence, and the HFY were free at last. But the weapon did not stop. The hollow rot continued to spread, moving slowly through space, infecting any star it touched with its terrible hunger. The HFY realized too late what they had done, and by the time they understood the full scope of their mistake, the plague had already reached their own home system. For 8,000 years, their sun had been dying, consumed inch by inch by the weapon they had created to free themselves. The scientists who had built the plague also built a cure, a stellar restoration device that could heal an infected star and stop the hollow rot in its tracks. They placed the device in this chamber and begged their emperor to use it, but the emperor was ashamed. He could not bear the thought of admitting to his people what their ancestors had done, could not face the guilt of knowing that they had destroyed an entire civilization and then accidentally doomed themselves with the same weapon. So he sealed the chamber and declared it forbidden. And he ordered all records of the hollow rot's true origin to be destroyed. The HFY forgot their own crime, and generation after generation they watched their sun grow dimmer without ever understanding why. Marcus felt sick as he watched the final images fade away. An entire species had chosen to die, rather than admit the truth about their past, and their pride and shame had condemned them to extinction. But then the projections continued, and what they showed next made Marcus's blood run cold. The hollow rot had not only infected the HFY sun 8,000 years ago. When the plague was first released, a piece of it had escaped through a wormhole remnant, traveling across vast distances of space to reach another star system entirely, a system with a yellow sun and 9 planets and a small blue world where life was just beginning to emerge from the ocean's earth. Marcus stared at the images in horror as the truth crashed over him like a wave. The hollow rot was inside the sun that warmed his home, the star that gave life to everyone he had ever known and loved. The plague worked slowly, far more slowly than anyone realized. But the projections showed exactly what would happen if nothing was done. In 300 years, the sun would begin to dim, and the people of Earth would start to notice that something was wrong. In 500 years, the sun would go dark entirely, and everything Marcus had ever cared about would freeze and die in the endless cold of space. Humanity would never see it coming, would never understand what was happening until it was far too late to do anything about it. They would die confused and afraid, victims of a war that had been fought before their ancestors had even learned to walk upright. Marcus fell to his knees. Overwhelmed by the weight of what he had learned, his home was dying, his people were doomed, and they had done nothing to deserve it. The Kethvari had committed the crime, and humanity would pay the price. For a long moment, Marcus simply knelt there in the darkness, feeling the despair wash over him. But then something else began to stir in his heart. Something stronger than despair. It was anger, hot and fierce. But not the kind of anger that wanted to destroy. It was the kind of anger that wanted to fight, to struggle, to refuse to accept that this was how the story ended. Marcus stood up and walked to the pedestal in the center of the room. The stellar restoration device sat there waiting, beautiful and terrible. The only hope for two worlds that did not even know they needed saving. He picked it up carefully, feeling its weight in his hands, and as he did so, another projection appeared before him. It was a map of the galaxy, showing the locations of every star the hollow rot had infected over the past 8,000 years. There were only two, the Kethvari Sun and the Sun of Earth. But seeing them marked there side by side made something click in Marcus's mind. This had never been just about the Kethvari. The Guardian had let him pass because this was about more than one species, more than one world. This was about the chance to save two civilizations that were connected by a tragedy neither of them understood. Marcus looked at the device in his hands and made a decision. He would not just save the Kethvari, and he would not try to escape with the device and save only Earth. He would do something that no one had ever done before. He would make these two species, so different from each other, understand that their fates were bound together. He would force them to work as partners, to put aside their pride and their fear and their ancient laws, and together, they would heal both suns and end the hollow rot forever. It was an impossible plan, Marcus knew. The kind of plan that only a human would be foolish enough to attempt. But standing there, in the ancient chamber, with the weight of two worlds in his hands, Marcus Cole smiled. Impossible had never stopped a human before, and it certainly was not going to stop him now. He turned and began the long walk back to the surface, ready to face whatever came next, ready to change the fate of two worlds, or die trying. When Marcus emerged from the ancient passages into the main halls of the Citadel, he found an army waiting for him. Hundreds of Kethvari warriors stood in perfect formation, their crystal bodies gleaming in the light, their weapons raised and ready to fire. But it was not the warriors that made Marcus stop in his tracks. It was the figure standing at their head, a being taller and more magnificent than any Kethvari he had yet seen, with crystal skin that shimmered like a galaxy of stars and eyes that burned with ancient power. This was the Empress herself, the supreme ruler of the Kethvari Empire, and she had descended from her throne for the first time in over a century to deal with the human who had committed the ultimate sacrilege. You have trespassed in the most sacred place in our civilization, the Empress said, her voice ringing through the hall like the sound of 1,000 bells. You have broken laws that have stood for 8,000 years and touched relics that no living being was ever meant to see again. She raised one hand, and the warriors around her raised their weapons higher. For these crimes, the punishment is death, and your body will be scattered to the void so that nothing remains of your existence. Marcus stood, alone before the might of an empire, holding the stellar restoration device in his hands. And he knew that he had only one chance to change everything. He did not run, and he did not fight. Instead, he slowly knelt down and placed the device on the floor in front of him. I know what this is, Marcus said, speaking loudly so that every Kethvari in the hall could hear him. I know what the hollow rot really is. And I know why your ancestors sealed the chamber and forbade anyone from entering. A murmur ran through the assembled warriors, and Marcus saw the Empress's eyes narrow dangerously. You speak nonsense, she said. The hollow rot is a natural plague, a cosmic disaster beyond our control. No, Marcus said. It is a weapon, created by your ancestors 8,000 years ago to destroy the precursors and win your freedom. But the weapon escaped and turned against you. And your emperor was so ashamed that he chose to let his people die rather than admit the truth. The hall erupted in angry voices. Warriors shouting that the human was lying, that he was trying to deceive them with impossible stories. But the Empress raised her hand, and silence fell instantly. How do you know these things? She asked, and for the first time, Marcus heard something other than contempt in her voice. He heard fear, because the chamber showed me. Marcus said, it showed me everything, including something that changes everything you think you know about humans. He stood up slowly, keeping his hands visible, showing that he was no threat. The hollow rot spread through a wormhole 8,000 years ago, he continued. It infected another star, a star far away from here. A star that you have never heard of. The Empress tilted her head, her crystal features unreadable. And why should I care about some distant star? She asked. Because it is my star, Marcus said. The star that warms my home, that gives life to my world, that shines on everyone I have ever loved. And in 500 years it will go dark, and every human being will die, not because of anything we did, but because of a crime your ancestors committed before we even existed. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus could see the warriors looking at each other, could see the doubt and confusion spreading through their ranks. You could have taken the device and fled, the Empress said slowly. You could have tried to save your own people and left us to die. Yes, Marcus agreed. I could have done that. Then why did you not do so? Marcus thought about the question, thought about everything he had learned and experienced since crashing on this world. He thought about Sereth, the disgraced guard who had risked everything to help a prisoner he had no reason to care about. He thought about the Guardian, the ancient consciousness that had judged him worthy, not because of his strength or intelligence, but because of his compassion. And he thought about what it meant to be human, really truly human, in a universe filled with beings who saw humanity as nothing more than clever vermin. Because that is not who we are, Marcus said. Humans are not perfect, and we have done terrible things to each other throughout our history. But we have also learned that the only way forward is together, that bridges are stronger than walls. That saving your enemy today might mean gaining a friend tomorrow. He looked directly at the Empress, meeting her burning eyes without flinching. Your ancestors created a weapon that is killing both our worlds. He said, we can blame each other for that. Or we can work together to fix it, and I choose to fix it. I choose to build a bridge between our people instead of letting pride and anger doom us both. The Empress was silent for a long time, and Marcus could feel the weight of history pressing down on this moment. 8,000 years of tradition and law stood against everything he was asking. 8,000 years of rigid certainty that the Kethvari way was the only way. But then the Empress did something that no Kethvari ruler had ever done before. She extended her hand toward the small human standing alone before her army. We have a word, she said. A word that we have never used because we have never needed it. A word that means to stand beside another as an equal, to share burdens and triumphs, to build something together that neither could build alone. Her crystal fingers reached toward Marcus, and he could see something new in her ancient eyes. The word is partner, she said, and I offer it to you now, human, if you will accept it. Marcus reached out and took her hand, feeling the cool smoothness of her crystal skin against his own warm flesh. I accept, he said, and in that moment, the history of two worlds changed forever. The device healed both sons. The hollow rot was destroyed at last, and the alliance between humans and Kethvari grew stronger with each passing Here Marcus lived to see human children learning the HFY language and HFY scholars studying human art and music. He lived to see the first joint expedition sent out to find what remained of the precursors. He lived to see the bridge he had built with one act of impossible courage grow into something that would last for generations. And when people asked him, in the years that followed, why he had risked everything for a species that had treated him as less than nothing, Marcus would smile and give the same answer every time. Because that is what humans do, he would say. We build bridges, even to people who once tried to burn them, especially to them. And we never stop believing that tomorrow can be better than today. Under two golden suns that would now burn for billions of years, the bridge between worlds stood strong, and it all began because one small human stepped into